There is not enough oil, and even if there were, the cost of extracting it in both economic and ecological terms is far too great. So what am I suggesting? What is Al's recipe for avoiding total global disaster? I've already written an article about this which was published on the Mathaba News website, but I'd like to expand on it here for a wider audience. Firstly, we live on a planet that is rich in natural resources beyond all meaning of the word. We have three forms of power that are both free or virtually free and continuous. In order of importance, they are the sun, the waves and the wind. Some critics have complained that the free lunch that was once promised by solar power has not materialised. This is manifestly not true. What has not materialised is the willingness to invest in this still relatively new technology. Earlier this month, a light aircraft powered entirely by solar cells flew for 26 hours non-stop. Okay, it will be years, probably decades before that feat can be repeated with the 747. But using the solar technology we have today, we could cover half the world's deserts with solar cells. All new buildings could have them built into their roofs. With existing solar technology, we could heat and or air condition and provide electricity for every home, every building, from Saudi Arabia to San Francisco, from Aden to Adelaide, Australia. Solar power can also be used with some degree of success in temperate countries such as Britain and Canada. And that is only as things stand. Okay, assuming we convert all or almost all our domestic and land-based transport to electric or alternative fuels, that still leaves two big consumers of oil, boats and planes. Though we can't run either ships or aircraft off solar cells in the foreseeable future, we can run ships off alternative fuels, and some time ago a Brazilian company developed an aircraft that runs off ethanol. As with so many advances in technology, what is needed most here is investment. We can also reduce our dependency on aircraft by using alternative methods of transport. For the foreseeable future, that means the train. To ask the people of America or Russia to travel by rail or road instead of by air is probably too much. But for smaller countries like Britain, Germany and Holland, where there are not vast distances to be covered, is a free or heavily subsidised high-speed train such a terrible alternative to flying? It may take less than an hour and a half to fly from London to Edinburgh, as opposed to 4.5 to 5 hours by train. But by the time you allow for checking in times, enhanced airline security and so on, the difference isn't that great. Now the really big question: where would all the money come from to pay for all this investment? The implementation of alternative energy sources, the enhancement of existing such technologies and the development of new ones. Who is going to pay for it? There's the rub. In the wake of the recent phony recession, the Bank of England created around £200 billion of new money. In its own words, the bank purchased assets with electronic money, which it created literally out of thin air. And the assets it purchased? Worthless bits of paper, if that. What the bank could have done, and should have done, was create this new money, and instead of giving it to the banks, it should have spent it into circulation itself. This is what governments have done in the past to fund great public works, and this is what they should do now. Instead of creating new money and giving it to the banks to play stupid casino games, something they've as good as admitted in the past few weeks, they should create new money debt-free and put it to good use to save our planet, because it's the only one we've got. The 200 billion I alluded to is just the Bank of England. I suppose all the central banks of all the EEC countries and the Federal Reserve and some of the untold billions the Saudis and other oil-rich nations have squirreled away. Suppose that, or a tiny fraction of it, would have been invested now in alternative technologies. In October 2009, over 160,000 new cars were sold in the UK. That was a particularly good month, but imagine what it would mean for the environment if every one of these vehicles had been adapted for an alternative fuel. Imagine if similar resources had been invested in alternative technologies such as solar power, and what this would entail. Of course, regular economists ask, how can we afford it? The real question though is, how can we not afford it? After all, we have millions of men and women in Britain who are unemployed, including graduates. The situation is no different in Europe or across the pond. What would it take to put those idle hands to work to produce something to reduce our dependence on oil and to save the environment, rather than giving the same money to the banks so that parasitic traders can gamble on the futures and derivatives markets and then expect the government, i.e. the taxpayer, to bail them out after the next crash? This is the biggest crisis facing mankind since the bubonic plague. It is bigger than AIDS, bigger than global warming, whatever one thinks of that. Bigger than even a limited nuclear war in the Middle East. If the oceans die, we die with them. From a personal perspective, this is something that doesn't much matter to me. A few days from now I'll be 54 years old, an age I had never expected to reach. I don't have any children or grandchildren who will be around 50 years from now. But if you do, then you owe it to them to do whatever is necessary to save what's left of this planet from these madmen. I've given you the facts, and I've told you what is to be done. Mine is not a lone voice, far from it. You ignore me and all the other Cassandras at your peril.